think we could start. Just wait another minute or so. We start the last episode of Tutto Raffaello, which has been a bit of a marathon because Raffaello, although he has lived a very short life, as we will see today, he has left behind a huge amount of works in several fields, not just as a painter, different genres of painting, from frescoes, historical paintings, portraits, and allegories, and many religious paintings, of course, some 50 or 60 Madonnas that we've seen. All with we got a couple more left, but we've seen the vast majority of them. And he was also an important architect from at least in the last 6-7 years of his life. And above all, it was more than a painter or an artist. He was also a very fundamental Renaissance man, fundamental intellectual, in a different way than Leonardo and Michelangelo, but probably in a way that no other artist has ever been able to. He was also acting as a patron of arts, which is something very unique for an artist. And if he hadn't died so young, he would have left behind a complete different city. I think Rome would have looked very different today if Raphael would have lived only another 5 or 10 years more, because of the project he was carrying, because of this approach to the ancient city. Okay, welcome everybody. Hello, I see Bogna, welcome everybody. We can start. Ciao Virvito, ciao Renzo, they're my friends. So we can start this last episode of Tutto Raffaello. And we left, well, I'll start where we left off. So today it's the final years, and especially the legacy of Raphael. What has Raphael left behind as an artist? I already introduced some of these elements of this team before, and something very important happened in the life of Raphael right between 1513 and 1514. This was a very important turning point for him. In 1513, Pope Julius II had died, and Pope Leo X Medici had become the new pope. Now, just a few months back, the Cardinal Giovanni de' Medici, who was the son of Lorenzo il Magnifico, the Lord of Florence, a famous, one of the most important figures in the Florentine Renaissance and in Renaissance as a whole, had marched in arms with a huge army against Florence to put an end to the Florentine Republic for over 20 years, for nearly 20 years, from 1594. Florence was a republic. The Medici had been sent away. The family still have, of course, wealth, and as you can imagine, they were very important in the Catholic Roman Church, mostly because of their wealth. But Giovanni was able to reclaim the city to the Medici, something that was very controversial because, of course, the Republic had grown very fond and they wanted to, recreate the glories of the time of Dante Alighieri of the 12th, 13th, and 14th century. Anyway, it was a different Florence then. The new Medici were not very close to the Medici before, and in fact, Michelangelo, for example, who grew up in the Medici house, hated them. Raffaello tolerated them because then they took over there was a kind of a sort of they took over a lot of areas, including Urbino later on. In fact, Lorenzo de' Medici Jr. became then the Duke of Urbino. So for Raphael, was very close to the Montefeltro and to the La Rovere. It was a bit of a hard bite to swallow. Anyway, Leo X was a highly cultivated man, was a very flashy man. It is described as with having a very poor health. When he was made pope, most people believe he would have not lived more than a few more weeks or months. He didn't look very healthy. He was swollen all the time, was sweating all the time. Even in winter, was constantly in sweat. So it was really kind of it wasn't the image of health. And in spite of this, he lived for nearly a decade. What happened is that Lorenzo de' Medici was a Giovanni de' Medici, Leo X, was a highly cultivated person. He was very, very intelligent and understood the value and the quality of Raphael. And at that time, the largest construction work in Rome and possibly in Europe was the reconstruction of the Basilica of St. Peter. You see it here. It was completed nearly a century later, at the end of the 16th century, with the dome that was later on then designed by Michelangelo. Even Michelangelo never saw it completed. Now, this concept of the dome was designed by Donato Bramante. And in this 19th century painting, you see there's Donato Bramante showing the project of the Basilica to Pope Julius II, which is the one who initiated it in 1505. That's Michelangelo here in the back, a few cardinals and other religious characters, and standing here on the right with the model of the Attila being stopped by the Pope. Here on the right, it's Raphael. There's a couple of mistakes because Pope Julius never approved this project, which was the project made by Raphael. Bramante had a complete different idea for the Basilica of St. Peter, and also this fresco was not in the was never presented to not in the way anyway to the Pope. And this is, of course, Pope Julius and the coin which was made to celebrate the construction of the Basilica. But the idea that Raphael had for the Basilica was very different. First of all, Donato Bramante, which was the architect of all the construction in the Vatican, including the palazzi where today there are the museums, and he carried a few other projects. He was also had several people helping him. The most prominent was Girolamo Sangallo, which was the uncle of Antonio Sangallo the Young. So Antonio was then later on the one who took over the project, but few years later. It was not automatically clear that Raphael would have been appointed architect of the most important construction work in Rome for centuries, to be honest. And Raphael had very little experience as an architect, although he had finished the Cappella Chigi, as we saw last time, and he did a few other projects in the same years. In April 1514, when Donato Bramante died, he was appointed chief architect of the Fabbrica di San Pietro. Raphael was smart enough to keep Antonio da Sangallo as his helper designer and to have a creative team working together with him. Here we could see the ideas, how they develop into different variations. The first thing that you can see as you look at these plans is that the way Raphael saw the basilica was the way in which eventually was built. Today, the Basilica of St. Peter is long, it's about 200 meters long, it's like 600 feet long. And Bramante had a different idea. Bramante had the idea of one large dome surmounting a cubic building, basically a large cube, moved by these little chapels and basically little passageways around and pillars. But basically there was the dome, 4 pillars to support the dome, and then 4 smaller chapels. But these are all ancillary to the main central shape, with this Greek cross shape, in which every single section of it is similar to the others. So everything rotates around the dome, which was, of course, this was modeled after the Dome of the Pantheon, and of course also the Dome of Florence. But Raphael saw it very differently, and very interestingly, he saw the other chapels on the side, besides the central dome, and the the transept and the other naves kind of independent and from the main construction. So each corner, each space, because it's such a large building, work in itself perfectly. We had perfect design in itself. It didn't have to be part of the bigger construction. This is a very unique approach, and it is how it feels in the Basilica of St. Peter. It can be in any side chapel, in any angle, and you can feel the beauty of it, and you can see the majesty of it and the design of it without having to, connect it necessarily with the center. Things were changed completely by Antonio Sangallo, which was kind of a stab in the back after Raphael died. Antonio Sangallo took over. Sangallo were a dynasty of architects from Florence, and it wasn't very nice what he did, because it was asked to be a helper of Raffaello, and eventually after Raffaello dies, oh, Raffaello did this all wrong. He didn't understand the basics of architecture. I show you how it can be made, and he made something which is sort of a hybrid between Bramante and Raphael project, but with a bit too many elements. It's very ornated. There are so unnecessary structure and pillars. Sangallo probably understood better the weight and the actual construction parts, in which you needed thicker, much bigger pillars in order to support the dome. Same thing, the design by Antonio Sangallo was reprised later on by both Peruzzi, which was very close to Raphael, and by Michelangelo, which was the one who actually built the apse and the transept and that part. Michelangelo creates something that look back at Bramante design, but more simple, more elegant, closer in the end to Raphael design. You could see is a kind of synthetic of the first two. And then later on in the late 16th century, early 17th century, was completely changed by Maderno, who created the long church, reverting to the project by Raphael. The model I showed you before, now inside the Basilica of St. Peter, in the pillars, because they're so big, they are rooms, and that's where the Fabbrica di San Pietro is. There's the archives with all the payment history of everything that was built. So we know exactly every detail of the construction of the basilica, and also models, objects, and there's people working in that actually. They are in the pillars, there are several rooms, and the access is only for scholars, and you need to have a very good sponsorship to grant access to those records and books that have been studied for centuries now. And this is one of the models. There are several. There's also a model made by at the time of Raphael. This is the basilica designed by Antonio Sangallo, but it's not very different from the one. I mean, it is different, but it kind of kept some elements of the Raphael ones, in the fact that it was long and he had that kind of spaces. It's structurally different. This is the project made by Raphael. Very little was built for the first decades. It was only I think around late 18 or 90 that just a part of the tribuna was built at the back. So and the pillars had been built originally, just the foundation of the pillars, by Bramante. So very little was built for a long time. It was only after 1530s that basically things kind of sped up a little bit, but not too much. What are the projects besides the Vatican, the Basilica of St. Peter, as an architect Raphael had done? And these are all projects that started from the Cappella Chigi, which was the first, so we are around 1510, and in the last 10 years of his life. So Raphael was just turning 30 when he was given this very important and prominent job, for which he was also paid a large amount. He was paid, I think, 300 gold ducats a year, and with 500, 600 ducats, you could buy a palace in central Rome. So at that time, and later on, I think it wasn't paid every year on time. It was paid 1,500 after 3 or 4 years of 4 or 5 years of working. In 1518, I think it was paid that much. 1518 or 1519, it was paid this lump sum of 1,500, because he hadn't been paying in the years before, because the Pope wasn't a very fast payer. And that was an amount of money that would have set a person for life, just to give you an idea also the importance also economically of this job. This little church here, it's hidden somewhere underneath the Lungotevere in Rome, It's very, very neglected. We're going to find it now. And it's here on Via Giulia. It's called Sant'Eligio degli Orefici. Here it is. So you know that the Lungoteveri, this kind of sort of roads that ran along the river, they were built in the 19th century, and they are higher than the city. So all these streets and the palace, which basically were built before the walls were built, they're actually on a lower level than the modern road. So then they're not in very, very nice area, and then there are cars parked and everything. This is the Church of Sant'Eligio, a pretty little church. Now, well, it's interesting. It's generally it's closed. It has very difficult opening times, and behind on the other side there is the Confraternita, the Oratorio del Gonfalone, which is a mid 16th century fresco chapel. So it's which is also very interesting. The access is from the other side. So this is Sant'Eligio, basically this church here. I have some picture to see it better. Oh, maybe we can just yes. Tac. Let me see. It's very pretty, but it's really not. Yes, let me see. No, you can't see it very much because they're the trees, but yes, here you can see. No. Now, the project, this was initiated actually around 1509, you know, and you can see it was a very tiny space. Sant'Eligio was, in this case, was this was sponsored by the goldsmiths, the Orefici. The goldsmiths, of course, they were largely based in Florence at that time, and so that there was that connection with Florence as well. Now, it has a very simple design, very similar to the Cappella Chigi. In this case, it has kind of Bramantesque element. It's beautiful inside. It's a very simple design. It reminds a lot of the Florentine churches, which has, you know, this like gray and white decoration, in which like the lines are the most important fun. The design is the most important times, and it has aspect, and it has this Greek kind of cross shape again. The altar has some Renaissance frescoes. It was actually finished by Peruzzi and in San Gallo in the following years. I think it was finished in the 1520s or 30s. So Raphael never saw this finished. But the initial idea, the initial project was his. Now, Raphael also built and designed a few buildings. One of the first jobs that he got to design a building was the stables of the Villa Farnesina. We saw that he worked in the Villa Farnesina first with the Galatea, and then years later in 1518, actually, in the Loggia of Psyche. But he also was in charge of designing the stable, which are not there anymore, but there's just a fragment, like a wall, where you could see the design. And in these years, Raphael had bought a palace near the Vatican, Palazzo Caprini, which sadly is not existing anymore. Palazzo Caprini was built just a few years before by Donato Bramante. It had these classical elements of large columns, the frames and decoration directly deriving from the ancient Roman buildings, the Colosseum and other buildings visible there. Raphael established there not just his residence, but also his creative team, because by this time, Raphael was so busy, he had some 20 people working with him, pupils, same age or a little younger than him, and which were a large creative team. There was Giulio Romano, there was Francesco Penni, Perin del Vaga, Polidoro da Caravaggio, Giovanni da Udine. These are only few, but there were a few others. They were very, very important, and each one of them was specialized in some sort of aspect. So exactly like in a creative team, he was like kind of the art director. He gave the ideas and he created the images, but then the pupils would have, or the collaborators, they would have actually developed the projects and they would have actually physically worked on it. On this architectural aspect here, he's also had a very deep interest since his very arrival into Rome for ancient Roman architecture. And this led him to kind of campaign with the Pope to create a map of ancient Rome and to preserve these monuments, the statues, and the buildings. And in order to foster this, his knowledge of ancient Roman architecture, to foster also this idea of preserve Rome, he had a humanist called Calvo to translate Vitruvius again. So there was this translation of Vitruvius. This humanist was called Fabio Calvo, and he actually was living in the palace with Raphael. And in the evenings, after a day being out, seeing how the frescoes were coming in the Vatican, seeing the Loggia in Trastevere, maybe seeing a couple of girlfriends in the meanwhile. And he worked in his workshop inside the palace at his paintings or checking his projects. And then in the evening would have discussed the translation with Calvo, which is very, very interesting. The fact that Raphael, an artist, he paid someone to do a translation job, a culture job, which is something that normally was sponsored by lords and kings and cardinals and nobles, and not for sure by an artist, which was, yeah, he inherited some the workshop from the father, he inherited some money, so it wasn't kind of a nobody completely, but yet it was somebody who had made a living out of his work, which at that time made him basically a working class man. This is Palazzo Brancone all'Aquila, which doesn't exist anymore. Several palaces, several constructions by Raphael were destroyed recently in the 19th century and the early 20th century. Two of them were in Borgo, which is that strip of land between St. Peter's Square and the river, and so everything that was destroyed by Mussolini in order to show the Vatican from the river. Now this is the so this I think is a 6th and 7th century drawing. We don't have design. I don't think we have designs for them. We have some designs, but not all of them. This is the palace here. And then he also built a palace for Jacopo da Brescia, which as well was destroyed. It was along the river. And you could see the heavy rustication, the frames, the lesene, everything is basically, they're all elements. This is the same palace. These are all elements of the reinvented, basically, Roman architecture. Now, if we go on the Lungotevere, so here, this road that goes from Piazza San Pietro, let me just find north because it's easier to look at north. So Piazza San Pietro, all the way down to the river, there was a very busy neighborhood here. And most of the palaces which are here have been destroyed. And there was a square called Piazza Scossacavalli because the horses used to break their legs there because the floor was, of course, not very, very neat. And this was basically rebuilt in order to celebrate the reconciliation between the. Oops, we ended up that was the Leonardo da Vinci Museum. Is a tourist trap that is there. Anyway, you can't see the square here. Now, if we go back to the palaces. So this is the Palazzo Jacopo da Brescia, and this is the Palazzo Caprini, which was originally built by Bramante. You could see that Raphael drew inspiration from Bramante's work. It was very close to Bramante. The type of rustication, the large opening at the bottom, that because most of these palaces were built for bankers, which all resides between the Vatican and the castle and the Castel Sant'Angelo in an area still called today Via dei Banchi Vecchi, which is just across the river from the Vatican. Via dei Banchi Nuovi, these two streets, they were basically bankers there, money lenders, because of course the Pope had to borrow a lot of money, the state had to borrow a lot of money, and so that was the strategic area where that was the bank district. of Rome at that time. So that's why they had these large openings at the bottom, because that's where the banks were actually, or their trade, whatever it was. Now, some other projects survived. This is Palazzo Alberini, of which only part of the building survives. The other part was then remade in the 19th century, following the original um, Raphael design. You could see the use of travertine, and again, this design that this is mutuated directly, for example, from the Colosseum or the Theatre of Marcellus, which you see archways on the ground floor, although there were then shops open, and then square, the Lysander on the top, the square reproduction. Here you could see this harmonic design again by Raphael. This is as well near Via dei Banchi Vecchi, Palazzo Berini. He also had the chance to propose a project of a beautiful church, which is this one, San Giovanni Fiorentini, which was then later on built um, in a very different way. San Giovanni Fiorentini was very important because it was the church of the Florentine community, and it's just across from the Vatican. Now, the current church, which was built later on, I think was Della Porta in there. I'm not sure it was that finished it. I can't remember at the moment, but it was right across. It's the church where Borromini is buried, by the way. Right here is right here at the beginning of Via Giulia. It's right here, and so in this case, Raphael, his ideas derive from the study of Vitruvius, the study of ancient Roman architecture. He did a trip to Tivoli together with Pietro Bembo, with Navaggero, Beazzano, that we saw the portrait the other time. Those are the intellectuals. Raphael, apart from hanging out with his friends and the people who cooperated with him, he tended to spend his free time when he was not in with one of his girlfriends, with other intellectuals and with humanists and with philosophers. He lived more like a philosopher than an artist at this point in Rome. And the dome is directly derived from the Dome of the Pantheon. And so the pronoun here, you can see this is the original design, is basically mutated directly from the Pantheon. He wanted to recreate the grandeur, the grand buildings of ancient Rome. That's why I'm saying if Raphael would have stayed another 10 years in life, he would have probably built something like this, maybe not San Giovanni Fiorentino, but he would have built a church somewhere else. He would have created, it would have given impulse to Roman architecture very, very different. And here you could see this is the drawing, which I think is in Berlin. We said before I couldn't read it, but and based on that drawing, this digital model has been created some years back, and you can see it feels very, very unique. It has this, there are definitely Roman proportions, but read in a very new way. You feel the influence of Bramante. You could see that this was a different perspective, different approach, similar somehow to Palladio approach, using the element of ancient Roman architecture as a new alphabet, but to speak a new language, a language which was the language of the moderns. So you would see the bell towers, for example, which had an elegance that reminds us of the 18th century designs. It's very, very elegant, very light. There is this idea that architecture has to have this lightness, this kind of, it should be kind of somehow defying also the heaviness and the structural. So it's very, very beautiful in the complete design, and the video as well is very interesting. Okay. Now, the Medici didn't have at that time a palace, which was kind of, making a statement as it should have been. And so was Pope Leo X was able to buy from the, I think it was owned by the church anyway, a plot of land with a building on the hill of Monte Mario, which, by the way, is where, not in the villa, but it's the area where I'm broadcasting from now. I'm in Rome. I just arrived a few hours ago, and I'm in Monte Mario as well. So this is Monte Mario today, is right above the stadium. And if we turn this out, this is the Villa Farnesina. I'm sorry, not the Villa Madama, which is owned by the Italian government now. That was the access. No. So this is Via di Villa Madama. This, of course, is a block because it's owned by the government. And we're able to, yes, we are able to see it from, let's go to the, and then, and it can be seen from the Stadio Olimpico, from the river. Let me just get this off. And it's kind of in this natural preserve, Monte Mario, all the side of this hill that facing Rome, it's all a natural preserve. There are very little buildings. The first building was already existing, and Raphael initiated the villa, which was never finished, and then eventually, after the Medici built another house, another palace downtown, and the project was later on abandoned. This also had originally the idea of building a hippodrome down here. That's why in 1920s Mussolini had the Foro Italico, this all sport facilities built here, because this was the project in the Renaissance to have like a big sports center down here for, of course, entertainment and parties. The Medici, they partied a lot. Pope then was famous for his dinners, his parties. There was a dinner once, it was celebrate one of the anniversaries, which was held by the near the Capitol Hill, where they had 26 courses for that dinner. So we have the descriptions and we have the menus, everything. Oh, sorry. So this lady here is Margherita Margherita d'Austria. She was the wife of one of the Medicis after Leo X, and she was quite a snobbish lady. That's why she was nicknamed Madame. And hence, both Palazzo Madama in central Rome, which was built by the Medici as well, and Villa Madama are named after her. You could see her here. She kind of despised the Romans a little bit because she was, of course, she was a lady from Austria. She didn't really like much being in Rome. Now, this is the idea of how the villa would have looked like. And the villa was to rival the Villa Farnesina by Agostino Chigi, built for the Medici. It had he had the theater, he had gardens, he had a private thermal baths, exactly like the baths of ancient Rome. Now, I have here a description. These are letters that Raphael wrote about the villa. He describes that in testa al quale cortile vi è il vestibolo a moda di usanza antiqua, con 6 colonne tonde ioniche e l'elorante. So he described at the end of the courtyard there's a vestibule, and how the ancient, like in the ancient way, the ancient Roman way means, the 6 columns, ionic columns, and so it describes all this. He also says, da man sinistra entrando in questo criptoportico, in verso del mezzodì, se va negli bagni dove ancora si può vedere per la scala segreta per le parti di sopra, le quali sono così ordinate. Hanno 2 camere di spogliasse e poi un loco tiepido aperto da un ungersi quando che uno è sbagnato e stufato. And here, as you enter, at noon, towards the noon on the left, there are these baths. There's a little secret staircase going down. You can still see the upstairs, and there are 2 rooms to get change, and then there's a room where you can put oil on yourself after you have had the bath and you have done the sauna. And then it kept on describing it in his like Italian, which sounds very slangly, mixed with the Marchigiano accent, I imagine, in the way it would speak. And and um, and he describes the use of thermobats as the thermobats like the Romans used them. And in the Renaissance, already in the Middle Ages, for medical reasons, the thermobats became popular. And of course, it was also a place of loose moral rules. So gentlemen and nobles had to love them because they could do some other things other than bathing, and so baths were built for cardinals, for nobles, and we'll see two of them made by Raphael. The baths in the villa were not built in the end. The villa was not built. So you can see here that's a vestibule is described, and that's the courtyard. This is the round courtyard, the theater, and then the Xistus, which was basically the garden. There's also the loggia with the fish pond, which is here, and then the hippodrome should have been down there at the bottom. You see when it says hippodromo, and the stables as well, that they were never built. Only half of the villa has been built, as you can see, and the theater was never built. It's a shame because it's a fantastic villa, and so I guess it's really an incredible project. It was later on decorated inside. There's some of the frescoes here and the stuccos by his pupils with a style similar to the Domus Aurea de Grottesche. Now, this particular type of stucco, it was technically not possible at the time where Raphael was working. So he had one of his members of his creative team, let's call them like that, probably Giovanni da Udine, creating a special plaster that could be modeled up until the very end and in a very easy way. Because plaster before he had to be pre-made and applied, it was not that easy to work. He created probably using pozzolana and a mixture of calcium carbonate from marble and from limescale in order to create a very malleable, a very workable plaster. Also, he created a different technique of plaster surface for the frescoes, which is known as fresco lucido, shiny fresco. Now, the frescoes in the 15th century, like even the Sistine Chapel, they are not as they don't have, they're kind of matte finish. They don't have that shiny finish. And also you can tell very well the different days from a close distance. You could see that different parts were were painted in different ways. That's because the plaster dried and then there was kind of a gap between one part and another one, which is also helpful for us because we know how long it took in the end. For Raphael fresco, you cannot. This is because he had developed a special type of plaster that was hit harder and made it smoother, and then was able to keep the color in a different way. So all these technical advances are also part of his workshop, which is very unique. And this type of fresco, it's a fresco that was closer to the ancient Roman frescoes that the other frescoes that were made in Rome at that time, the fresco lucido. They were very similar to the incausto technique, which was the technique which we don't know how it worked. The Vitruvius and the other ancient sources describe it as a type of fresco which was dried using fire. So like the frescoes in Pompeii. Now, there should have been frescoes similar to the ones in Pompeii, in Rome, visible at that time, that then later on faded, of some of which we know, for example, the Domus Aurea. For others, we don't, because they've been lost. But there would have been a lot, because still today, when you dig, a lot of frescoes emerge. And so studying those frescoes, he wanted to represent the same effect without having to go into the failure, for example, like Leonardo da Vinci, when Florence had tried to do that with the fire and it melted. So it wasn't really a good idea. Now you can see here the frame and this little room. This belongs to another project, again, an architectural project for which we have to travel Let's get the map back to the Vatican. Let's see. This is Monte Mario here, which has also beautiful Belvedere. It's something where tourists normally don't go because it's far out. This is the astronomical observatory, which can be seen from the Vatican. And then there's the Belvedere, where there used to be a cafe that closed during COVID, from which you can basically see all of Rome. Is right here. It's at the top. There it is. I'll just show you since we're here. So this is the Zodiaco Cafe that last time I was up there was closed. And then you can have an amazing view here. It's not very easy to get to, but if you have the chance, it's definitely something to see. Now, back to, let me close this. Back to the Vatican, right next to the Basilica of St. Peter, there is the Palazzo Apostolico. And the Palazzo Apostolico, which is this one, now it's in two wings, but there was a project for a loggia that had to be built. Let me just get. There was a project so this is the Palazzo Apostolico here. This is the one the rooms Raphael are. And this other wing here, it didn't have the loggia here. This was built by Raphael. And at that time, only the ground floor was built first. And then this where the lodges originally opened, that also needed to connect the palace with the square, the newly built square here, the lodges right here. And so these were built also as a project by Raphael and decorated by Raphael in several years. One of Raphael and pupils, of course. In one of them, there was the apartment of the Cardinal Bibbiena, which was, of course, very close to the Pope. And the Cardinal Dovezzi Bibbiena actually had a small apartment and then a bath room being built with frescoes, which kind of remind of the ancient Roman frescoes. With this is very similar as a style to the House of the Vetti in Pompeii, which was still underground, like under 30 feet of dirt, and was only discovered in the 18th century. But there must have been something similar in Rome at that time, from which Raphael took inspiration. It's very, very beautiful. He has this deep red, the Pompeian red, and then he has these little cherubs here that are like in the House of the Vetti. And then there are these paintings here painted on the wall, which was also something you find in the House of the Vetti. And also the lodge of the cardinal was painted with the grottesque, with the same figures, the same kind of fine figures, cherubs, birds, and lambs and stuff, which was then there. Now, the theme of the frescoes here, it's related with Venus, which is quite unusual for a cardinal, although Cardinal Bibbiena, we know he enjoyed life very much, enjoyed also the presence of women very much, so it wasn't really uncommon. He had planned to have a statue of Venus displaying here in this niche, and so that's why everything had to be connected with that. The bath was not just a place for bathing, it was also a place for love. And so here there's the details of the grotesque of the loggia with the cheetah, with birds of every sort, very, very intricate, very, very beautiful. The angels, you can recognize, they're very very Raphaelesque angels. At the same time, Raphael kept his workshop with some paintings being made. This is a large altarpiece which was sent to Spain for the convent of the Spasimo in Palermo, and is the ride to Calvary. And it's a very complex moment in which Christ has just fallen. There are the soldiers on one side at the back, and then on the right side there's the Virgin Mary on the knees with the hands up. And now here you could see that Raphael has developed this language which is able to create very complex figures, to display the figure in a very complex way on several levels, but create an image that is instantly recognizable. You know exactly what's happening there. And then you can also feel connected with the different feelings and emotions of all the characters involved. Now, this type of illustration of an episode. It became the language that was used that for centuries, although in different styles, to illustrate religious art in the 16th, 17th, 18th, up to the 19th century, basically up until the Impressionists. So Raphael really became the master of the masters. Later on in the 17th century, painters like Charles Lebrun, which was the director of the Academy of Painting in Paris, choose Raphael artworks just to teach students how this is how you paint. So if they had to choose a masterpiece to teach youngsters how to paint, they choose Raphael, and this happened for centuries. A beautiful Madonna. Now, both of these are in Madrid in the Prado Museum. This was in Palermo, and so many masterpieces were taken by the Spaniards because both Sicily and Naples and southern Italy were colony of the Spaniards for centuries. Now, this is a Holy Family, also known as the Madonna della Rosa, and it has this beautiful detailed scene where we have the child and and Saint John, and that's the rose in the first place, which is of course the petals of the rose symbolize the sacrifice of Christ somehow, and then you have the Virgin Mary in the center in this beautiful position in which we could see she's twisting completely, so that's Michelangelo there, reused by Raphael in this sense, and you could see the elegance of the early Madonnas, but the way the light is used, the darkening, is a much more mature Raphael, and this kind of views of the shadowing of the light and the darkness against the light. We saw something, La Fornarina has that kind of dark backdrop that makes the figures in the light resulting a bit more. This was something that later on used by Caravaggio, used by great masters of the Baroque age. So when we study history of art, usually they teach us, oh, this is Gothic, this is Baroque, this is Renaissance. But these are definitions made centuries later, just by lazy art historians, just like so you could write a book about it, and you could put it like in one after the other. But of course, there's also elements that transit and elements that persist within different styles and different artists. There are some elements that are more common in certain styles and certain periods than in others, but of course you could see elements that kind of follow through. Caravaggio then is between because it's actually it's a mannerist artist that then develops into Baroque. This is very important painting. This one and another one I'll show you later. They were made they were paid for by the Medici. Lorenzo de' Medici, Duke of Urbino, so the younger was the nephew of Leone, of Leo X, of the Pope. And he took, they basically took over the Duchy of Urbino for a while. Had two paintings paid and sent to Francis I, the King of France, as a thank you gift. And it was at that time was very hard. Like Raphael was in high demand here, and at that time when this was made, it was very difficult to get Raphael painting. There's Alfonso d'Este that keeps sending letters to Raphael for years, and a few others important people that were asking, "I need this painting. Where are you able to work on it?" And Raphael kept replying email and not emails, of course, letters, in which he keeps saying, "Yes, I'm thinking of doing this and doing that." So he describes how the painting would be, except he never did it. He was hoping to have more time in life, probably. And this particular painting, which is the large St. Michael, there's another smaller one that they have in the in the in the in the Louvre. It's a masterpiece. You see the beauty of the angel. Look at the wings; they are real bird wings. And then here, the Archangel Michael is dressed as a Roman soldier, and he is stepping onto the devil. This was copied several times. There's a version of it by Guido Reni in a church in central Rome. There are several versions of this painting because it really became an incredible painting. We also have the original drawing of the painting preserved, the original design. Now, this is some of the details that you could see. You see the difference between the wings of the devil, has horns and the face all twisted looking up. The foot like stepping there. Again, this is from Roman statues and Roman. And then the wings of the angel we saw before. It's really an incredible painting. This is yeah, this is with the frame, and it's in the Louvre. Was this painting here that was chosen by Lebrun in kind of 1616 or something? He opened his academy of drawing in Paris, and then he started his first lesson having this painting here, which was from the Royal Collection. He had the painting in the classroom and say, "This is how we paint," and he kind of celebrated the body, how light and elegant it is, especially compared to the Michelangelo heavy, muscly figures, and then you could see the movement. The Deli is stepping on him, but at the same time, it's very light because it's angelic. And then you see the knee, the precision, the anatomical precision as well. And then you could see here in the edge of the skirts, I don't know what to call the skirt of the angel, Raphael Urbinus, and then Pingebat and the year, which is the 18. Now, the other painting that was made for the Medici and sent to the King of France was this beautiful Sagra Familia, where we have the child launching himself into the Virgin Mary. This is very sweet, Virgin Mary approaching him down. It's a very familiar, intimate approach. But around we have the angels at the back. We have Saint Joseph as well in the background. We have Saint Elizabeth, the cousin of Mary, with the young John the Baptist. So it's very complex, very rich, but at the same time, it's so very easy to understand and very easy to appreciate. And this is the language that then was chosen also by the early Baroque artists and by the Contra-Reformed Church, because for at least another 200-300 years, as I said, this became the canon, the standard. Also, the way the Virgin Mary, the colors that the Virgin Mary wears, the pink and the blue, and they were consistent. And this were the pair of paintings that together were sent to Paris. So this is one of the few paintings that the French didn't steal from us. We just sent them. And in the same years, there's this double self-portrait in which we have a mature and adult Raphael with the typical kind of hairstyle that has it all over his life. And then in this case, he grew a beard because he became older. I also think he grew a beard because he wanted to be like the philosophers. He's very active intellectually in this time. His friends are Baldassare Castiglione, Pietro Bembo, Navaggero, Beazzano, and a few others. He has, contacts with humanists, with intellectuals, so it's really developed an intellect. He also made attempts at being a poet. We have 6 sonnets written by Raphael, which are terrible, so they are not very well written, and so he was definitely not a poet like Michelangelo was a divine poet in this sense. Who is the other person here? That's a good question. I mean, most historians believe that the man in the back is for sure Raphael. The man in the forefront is a very close friend. Now, some believe that he is because of the position of the hand, and he has the first hand forward and the other one on the side where you keep the sword. It was his fencing master. Of course, that time was part of being in a high society to be able to, bear a sword and have a sword. And so, especially the way he has the hand indicating, it's also the same way you hold the fold, the type of sword used in fencing. One of the type of sword used in fencing, and if you've done it, it's one of the. I took it in school. Like my friends Renzo and Pierre know that we had to do this fencing lessons, and so it has a very strange way to hold it, and that's how you put the fingers actually to hold the fencing sword. So it could have been his fencing master, it could have been another one of his friends. There's a long list of names have been made. The important thing here, he's here representing himself, and he's representing friendship. He's representing some that he valued above all, most of of other things. There's another letter that we have, which I won't read it, but I will summarize it. That Raphael wrote to his uncle, the brother of Magia Charla. Magia Charla was Raphael's mother, and this man insisted Raphael that he should take a wife when he was young, because that was the classical thing, and for many families still is. You know, your parents or the ones who love you, they don't think you're settled up until you get married and you have children. And the uncle was very supportive of Raphael, also insisted with that. And funnily enough, we also have a letter by Michelangelo, who wrote to his nephew, insist with him. The nephew was called Leonardo Buonarroti. Insist him, you should get a wife, because although they're a nuisance, you need a wife in life. Although Michelangelo never got married. It was, of course, not into women at all, as we know well, because he wrote a lot about it and his male lovers. But Raphael did love women very much, but he didn't settle, not because he wasn't interested in marriage, but because he was waiting to become more important and to marry well. And that's what he replies to his uncle in his letter. Said, "Uncle, I know you for a few years, you now asked me to get married, and I always postpone it, and I know you don't like this, but look, if I had married a few years ago, I should have had for someone a very low social level. But now I have as a fiancée the niece of the Cardinal Bibbiena, which the poor thing died before they could get married, so Raphael never got married in the end. Among the portraits that he made in this time, he made this very important portrait. This was sent to Florence, I think, for the celebrations of the Medici there, where the Pope didn't travel to. At that time, kings and royals and popes, they did travel, but not very much, because it was dangerous. Half of the time, people who traveled never came back. So there's a number of things that could happen, illness, and so it wasn't possible to travel to really rule on the way. So they traveled if they had to really to go somewhere, or if it was for war, but otherwise they stayed in the court and had people, ambassadors going to them. So portraits were also a very important way to have the presence of someone which wasn't present. It was the virtual, it was the Zoom of the Renaissance. And very often even marriages were celebrated with one of the sponsors be absent, with a nice portrait in place. Of course, the portrait represented them even better than they look in present. We know Giovanni de' Medici was a big podgy guy, but he was also looked very ill, and he kind of looked, and he had the kind of a sad, kind of a dark kind of aura in this painting. Raphael kind of go along with the Pope, but he didn't have the same relation that he had, for example, with Pope Julius. And in fact, also this painting is kind of diagonal. He has the Pope with the cardinals on both sides, which is quite unusual. The painting success is all in the beautiful reds and in the way the reflection details of the reds. And there are the two cardinals, Giuliano de' Medici, which was the first cousin of Giovanni de' Medici, and so was the son of Giuliano, yeah. And then the other one was Luigi de' Rossi, which was the maternal cousin, of course, of the Pope. You have a heavy Bible and a heavy belt there. You can see here the three of them the Medici looking away, while the Rossi is looking at the house. And you can see here the reflection of the window in the chair, which is the brass of the chair, which is very, very beautiful. For the same reason, Raphael made this portrait of Lorenzo de' Medici, which later on became the Duke of Urbino. And here you can see Raphael feels quite detached with the subject. It's more about the dress and the status. Of course, the Medici had taken over Urbino. Raphael wasn't very happy about that. This painting sold a few years back. Here, this is the Christie's who sold it. We don't know where it's not disclosed where it currently is, and it's quite common because private collectors, which has paintings that worth several millions, they don't disclose the property of the address because, of course, people can break in. But anyway, this was sold nearly 20 years ago for um, um, over 20 million euros, which is over 20 million, 24, 25 million dollars. That's a lot of money. So he fetched, almost double what he went for originally. And similar, he also made a portrait. This was Dona Isabel, which was at that time, I think, was the wife of the ruler of Naples, of the Viceroy Naples. And you could see elements very close to La Velata, which is the portrait that we saw the other day, except here there's a very intricate background with the with the other elements and architectural elements, a loggia, servant. So there's a lot going on at the back. These were paintings where also pupils were used. Another Madonna, which is in Spain, is the Madonna de la Quercia, the Madonna of the oak and of the oak tree. And here, I'd like to introduce also another element of Raphael activity in these years. In fact, in 1515, Raphael was appointed by Pope Leo X the person responsible for the ancient Roman monuments. But he went beyond that. He actually had written a letter that I have here in the full form, together with Baldassare Castiglione, which was his friend, to the Pope to insist with him to preserve the ancient Roman monuments and to study them. He actually planned using an instrument which was similar to was based on a compass principle to measure the buildings using trigonometry. And he writes here, quanti pontefici, Padre Santissimo, i quali avevano il medesimo ufficio che vostra santità, ma non già il medesimo sapere, né il medesimo valore, quanti, dico, hanno atteso a ruinare templi antichi, statue, archi e altri edifici gloriosi, quanti hanno comportato che solamente per pigliar terra pozzolana si siano scavati dei fondamenti. And then it continues. How many popes, your holiness, popes that didn't have your culture and your greatness? Of course, he is in this in letters. This kind of starting a letter with a lot of compliments is called captatio benevolenze. You kind of make sure that the person you're addressing really likes you by throwing at them a lot of compliments. And then he said, many popes, they destroyed ancient temples and statues and arches and other glorious buildings just to get limestone and just to, destroy them or to get dirt and ground and construction materials. So his point is, we're destroying the city to build a new city. We can build a new city without destroying the old one. And actually, we should measure it and we should preserve it, which is something 300 years ahead of his time. The very first preservation laws were made in 1820, so over 300 years later. And now, even today, sometimes we struggle to preserve our heritage. So he was really, really far. And you could see this reflected in this painting, in which you have, the Virgin Mary with the child, but you have the Roman column and monuments on which St. Joseph is leaning, and you have the Basilica Maestrantius in the background. Let's go to yes, this is the copy which is on the Prado Museum. You see the oak is beautiful. Each leaf is painted individually, each one with its own shading. Now, this meant that there was a lot working hours put in the painting, and this is, of course, the value. Look at the blue. Now, after seeing the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, also Raphael started to use a lot of blue, very expensive blue. So blue oltremare was called, the one made with the lapis. And then at the back, you see the so-called Temple of Minerva Medica and the Basilica of Maestrantius. You have ancient Roman buildings, ruins here, there in the back. Really, really incredible. That's another one in the very similar as well in the Prado Museum, made in the same years. Again, with a very complex background, the blues, St. Joseph is pushed even back behind an archway. And you can see the crib, how beautiful it is. This is the kind type of crib that he would have seen in the center of Rome. There's this portrait here, which is probably largely by pupils, which is in Modena, but it's a very beautiful portrait, very Leonardesque in sense. And at that time, at the time of Pope Medici, also Leonardo da Vinci was in Rome in 1514 up until 1516. So it's also important to notice that. There is a San Giovannino. Of this painting, there are several copies in several museums. This is considered largely by Giulio Romano, anyway, largely painted by pupils. And then the lodges. I told you already that he was building these lodges. And then in the top floor, he created this beautiful gallery with all the Old Testament. And they are really incredible and incredibly detailed and incredibly ornated stuccos and frescoes made with the aforementioned technique of the fresco lucido, with a lot of exotic fruits and flowers, which we will see also in the Loggia of Psyche, which was started in the same years. So he's doing these two different lodges, one completely religious and one completely pagan, let's say, which is a actually celebration of love, but also of female beauty with all those beautiful nudes that we've seen. Here we have the creation. Now there's so many episodes. I won't go through all of them, but it's just like to give you an idea of how beautiful they are, these lodges. Unfortunately, these are inside the Palazzo Apostolico. This current pope doesn't live there, but the other popes have, and there's the office of the pope there anyway. And these are not accessible to the public, and you need to know someone who works in there to access them. So it's very, very difficult to see them. They're not very well preserved because the windows that you see now, they were added much later for a good couple of centuries. They were open. The loggia was actually like a balcony, and so there was humidity and the sand bleached them, and so they were not. They actually aged pretty well consider the condition in which they've been kept. They were restored several times, and here you can see the creation with the this is the response Raphael had created to separation of dark and light, creation of the plants and everything. So the response that Raphael has made to Michelangelo's creation, to the Sistine Chapel. You can see same color, this beautiful pink gown. This very beautiful decoration of the animals. You have all the animals. Of course, the lion is standing next because the lion was the symbol of the Medici, together with the crest with the bolts. But the lion was, in fact, in Palazzo Madama, which is now serves as the Roman Senate, there's the lion skin right above the entrance door. And a number of exotic animals, including the elephant. There was one actually in the Vatican those years because it was the little elephant Hanno, which was gifted to the Pope, and so on. And you have unicorn at the back, of course, the creation of Adam and Eve. And here, of course, you have the temptation with the snake with a female face, very lush vegetation, and the figures here that are a lot. Now, this is already nearly to mannerism. You see the way the figures are made. And then they're sent out of the Garden of Eden. Very, very similar to Michelangelo, although in a different way. Here you see abundant blue, which hasn't aged very well. And you can see Noah's Ark and the deluge. See the construction of Noah's Ark, all the figures, the muscles, the structure at the back. Thanksgiving on Noah here with the sacrifice. Sacrifice is again mutuated from the ancient Roman with the several animals with the ancient Roman bas relief. The flood. There's also a flood on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel by Michelangelo. And then, of course, all the pairs of animals. Again, the lion in the forefront, all going into the ark. And then there's then there are biblical episodes that follow. These are the different Leah and Raquel, real Leah and Rachel. So the various episodes of the Old Testament. The dream of Jacob, that's Jacob and the splitting, Jacob and Esau, the splitting of the herd. You could see the crest of the Medici on the top and the very, very elaborated stacco with which he was for the first time able to recreate the same quality of the ancient Roman technique. And it's really an incredible aspect if you think also of the technology involved here. So they studied a particular uh, way that the ancient Roman stackers were made in order to replicate them. And here we have, there's more now of this ancient. This is Moses rescued from the waters. So Moses and the burning bush. The crossing of the Red Sea. It's very dramatic. It's very beautiful the way it's represented. This sort of, kind of column, red column in the center, which represents the splitting of the water. Moses who hits the rock. Moses received the Ten Commandments. Then here the worshipping of the gilded calf. These are also episodes that you could see in the Sistine Chapel on the walls made by the Quattrocentisti. So Raphael was aware that he was competing somehow, because of course there was a comparison, especially being so close. Moses showing the Ten Commandments, and then the Ark of Covenants, Jericho, is it? There are a few others episodes now that continue. They are really, really. So this is David, I think. You could see that this is the justice of Solomon. You could see that there is that kind of narrative that you see also in the rooms. Some of them are not very well kept. And the last one is with the gospel, with the adoration of the shepherds, the adoration of the Magi kings here, with the child. Then you have the christening of Christ and the Last Supper, which is very different from the Last Suppers, which were made all over the 1400s. The Last Supper, the canonical one, made by several artists, everybody was lined up on one side of the table, which is unrealistic because nobody just sits 12 people or 13 people on one side of the table and leave the other one empty, because you have to make the painting. But it was the way it was done. It wasn't just the Leonardo da Vinci one. There were several before and several after, which all used that same way, which became canonical. But here, no. And here you see all around the square table. It's very, very interesting. His take on an angle. Very, very beautiful. Now, the letter that Raphael wrote to the Pope, this is the manuscript. It was actually written together with Baldassare Castiglione. So it was actually Castiglione who put it down. And in that letter, Raphael describes the tools and instruments, including this sort of it's basically a compass-based tool to measure the buildings. So he wanted to create a mapping of all ancient Rome first, something that was only done later on. In the first map of Rome was made later, but the 18th century, but the ancient Rome map was only made in the 19th century, so really incredible. And of course, it was Baldassare Castiglione. This is the portrait of Baldassare that we saw last time, and see the handwriting to the Pope. And if Raphael had lived a few years longer, maybe he would have been able to preserve a lot more of ancient Rome, because many buildings which were known back then faded or were destroyed or even dismantled, especially in the 16th, 17th century. Entire buildings were taken down to build something else. And the last painting that Raphael made was the Transfiguration. Only recently, after the last restoration, they were able to describe and define the fact that Raphael had basically painted the both parts, because for a long time it was believed that the bottom part, with the disciples trying to heal the guy possessed by the devil here on the right, it was actually painted only by the pupils, but it was Raphael. And this was actually hung on his deathbed at the top of his head, the deathbed, when he died. It was before it was then given to the Cardinal Medici, Giuliano de' Medici, who had originally commissioned this painting and a painting to Sebastiano del Piombo, which was the friend of Michelangelo. It was actually kind of a rival. And this is in the Vatican museums, in the same room with the tapestries. I have it here. Yes, it's right here. It's a huge painting, 5 meters tall or so, 4 or 5 meters tall, and these are the tapestries. Which on the top we have this very rare iconography of Christ appearing to the disciples within Elijah and Moses, which happened like a month before the crucifixion. And this is the part below is the faith in Christ made the disciples being able to perform miracles and also to perform exorcism. In this case, they were failing to free the boy from the devil because they didn't believe in Christ as they should have. So it's a very important piece, especially consider that 2 years before this was painted, Martin Luther, 1517, has started Protestantism, and then there was a huge divide between the Catholic Church and the Roman Church, in which, of course, the Pope Leo was involved. Now, we have seen part of the rooms of Raphael, but rooms of Raphael were not finished yet. While doing all this, Raphael was also doing the rooms for Pope Leo. And so we've seen the rooms the other day here. This one with the coronation, in which we have the Pope Leo. But then the last one was actually painted after Raphael had died. And there is this letter that Sebastiano Piombo had sent to Michelangelo, which was in Florence, said, speak to your friend Giovanni de' Medici, because they grew up together in the house of Lorenzo Magnifico in Florence, and tell him that I am the best painter who could do the room. Don't let the pupils of Raphael that are bragging about it take over, which is what they did. The room had already been started. This figure here with the justice here had already been made. And then this large battle scene of Raphael representing Constantine defeating his enemies was already, the concept of Raphael was just not painted yet. And then so the pupils of Raphael, they had to finish it. It was quite a trouble, the completion of this room, because after the Pope Leo died, the following Pope, Hadrian of Florence, Hadrian VI, he was from Utrecht, was the last non-Italian pope before Wojtyla in the 20th century. And he was very tight. He stopped all the spending in Rome, all the construction, everything. And so it lasted for about 18 months, 20 months, and then they got rid of him. They took him on a pilgrimage to the marshes, so he got anthrax and he died a few weeks later. Probably deliberately, they took them there, hoping that malaria or something would have killed him. And so this After this, there was another Medici, Clement VII, who actually had the room being finished by 1524. But for nearly 2 years, the works were stopped. Now, this is the 3D, which is before it was restored. So I'm going to use the pictures here. This is the first scene, which is the Allocutio, where we have the miracle, what, Constantine saw the cross saying, this is how you will win, and the dragon symbol of paganism. The Allocutio is directly mutuated from the Roman arches, particularly this is the Arch of Constantine, when you have the Allocutio of the emperor addressing the troops. See, even the standards, everything, the spears, everything is there. The block of marble which it stands, it's really, really incredible. And see how beautifully detailed every single aspect is. The envoy reminds again of the prisoner of the Pope, the Federico Gonzaga. And then in the right corner, there is this man. His name was Gradasso. He was the jester of the Cardinal Ippolito de' Medici. He was a dwarf used as a jester. There were several, dwarfs that were used as jesters during the Middle Age, the Renaissance. And he's represented also with this, kind of physical, yeah, kind of peculiarities. And this is the Cardinal Ippolito de' Medici. Rumors said he was actually the son of the Pope, not the nephew. While then on the battle, we have the man on the white horse in the center, constantly dressed in gold. It is the most important figure. That's why he's in the center. Also here, Raphael was creating kind of standard that will last for centuries. Is here also kind resuming a representation of battles which had started long before. He had seen in Florence the attempts and the cartoon by Michelangelo and by Leonardo, so he knew that that was really a hot topic to create a battle scene that was epic, and so here it creates really kind of a handbook for how to paint epic scenes in which you have the fight, the struggle, the soldier on the floor, death, but also triumph, the angels, the announcement of victory. So all the elements of the narrative, again, storytelling, all here. The bridge, which is the place that puts in geographical spot. We know that the battle took place nearby the Mulvian Bridge, Ponte Milvio, in the fields called then after Saxa Rubra, red stones, because of the blood of this battle, which had tens of thousands of Roman soldiers against other Roman soldiers. And you see the good guy on the white horse, because of course also the Pope would, right? And then the bad guy, which is Sanzio, with the brown horse and dressed in purple, kind of sinking in the water. Reminds me like in those old American movies where you have the good guy driving an American car and the bad guy driving a foreign car. So it's kind of, you want to identify straight away who is the good guy and who is the bad guy. Inoxigno vince, so bravo Renzo. And there are also precedents in ancient Roman bas reliefs. This is the sarcophagus of Portonaccio, in which you see you have the scene completely filled, but you have the details of the outfits, and so they knew very well the outfits because they could see there were thousands of bas reliefs like this in Rome back then. There still are, and then they could learn even you see the metal part. This is one of the drawings that was made for the painting. So you see, most of the elements of the paintings were already there. And then we have the christening of Constantine, which was we don't know if it ever happened, or probably never happened in Rome because we only have one source saying that. Anyway, in the center, the Pope, which according to the tradition was Pope Sylvester, actually has the physical appearance of Pope Clemens. So the Pope asked for his own portrait, as the predecessors. You see, the Pope was in seating at that time, was the one who got to represent an historical painting. Inside the building that still exists in Rome today, in the same shape as it is in this fresco, which is the baptistry in St. John in Lateran. It's still pretty much as you see here. And then there are historical figures. So Constantine is on his knee without the clothing. So here he's obeying to the primate of the papacy, which is a very important element, that the religious power overcomes the political power. The political power depends from the religious power, from God's power. And then you have two figures standing on the right and on the left. We have King. Well, they were at that time when they were represented. They represented the King of France and the Emperor of Habsburg, which are at war in Italy at that time. There were war amongst them, but most of the battles took place in Italy. And the Pope managed to get them together and to have a temporary alliance of peace. The wars of Italy lasted from 1594 till 1559, so they lasted nearly 70 years, and they were very destructive for the Italian society. Anyway, this seemed a moment of hope that they were trying to get peace, which didn't happen. And so we have, these are how they look like. Francis I, you can recognize because of the big nose, and then here the king of Charles V of Habsburg, which at that time the Habsburgs were already, it was the Holy Roman German Emperor and also the kings of Spain. So he had a very large kingdom. And then the guy here on the back, pointed by the French king here, it's actually the banker Fugger, which was a German banker, one of the wealthiest men who ever have lived in history. If we had a chart of the 10 wealthiest men ever, first one would be Emperor Augustus, which had an incredible amount of riches, and then a few other, dictators over time, including the Ethiopian one, Munsa Mansa or whatever it was, the Mali king in the Middle Ages, and then Fugger is made the first 10 chart, even wealthier than compared to current billionaires, who you all know well. And so here on the right, sitting on the right, there's Crispus, which was the son of Constantine. And then here it says, of course, Lavacrum Renascentis Vitae is the baptism, of course, because it brings a Christian to a new life. Well, this here is the Basilica of St. Peter, in which there is the donation. Constantine on his knees donates a little statue that represents the property of the lands around Rome, hence creating the political basis for the kingdom of the church, which of course was a forgery. They had also a document with this donation by Constantine, which in the 1400 Lorenzo Valla had proven being a fake, but the church always holds truth to the fact that the donation was actually made. And there are several other ladies and figures and figures here. This guy here on the right is again most likely Federico Gonzaga, which then became the head of the Papal army. And he was the one who failed the Pope in 1527. He was the one who didn't stop the Lanzi, the German soldiers of the Emperor of Habsburg, Charles V, to come down to Rome and destroy Rome for a year and devastate it, and put into an end basically the higher Renaissance in Rome. There are several portraits of popes and allegories. One of them, this one here, the Justice with the ostrich, which was a symbol of justice, and the scale was painted using oil and not tempera by Raphael himself. During recent restorations in the last 3-4 years, they have confirmed that this was actually painted by hand by Raphael. Now, in 1527, they were raided by the Lanzi, and then there were graffiti made in the rooms of the Papal Palace, which was conquered by the Lanzi, and also in other parts. And with this kind of last work finished by the pupils of Raphael, the pupils of Raphael dispersed in Europe. Perin del Vaga, after making the Castel Sant'Angelo, went to Genoa to make Palazzo Doria and a few other frescoes. Giulio Romano went to Mantua to make Palazzo Te and make the frescoes. So several artists which worked with Raphael for years, then became a whole generation of artists who really spread the language and the legacy of Raphael all over Europe. So making him the most important and influential artist of his generation, and definitely an artist who several generations of artists for the centuries later will look up to learn how to paint and create a canon of beauty. This is the monument to Raphael, which is in Urbino, his birthplace. Raphael, as we saw at the first session, was buried then in the Pantheon, where it still rests and is still visited by millions of people every year, many of them homaging him. And this is the end. Now, before we finish, I have an announcement to make, because from March the 10th, I'll start another series that I promised before about Bernini, Gian Lorenzo Bernini, the Baroque artist. And it will be, again, Tutto Bernini. There will be basically 4 episodes. Bernini is a sculptor, as a painter, as an architect, as a choreographer, as a sonographer, as a sonographer, and as an author as well. He's also wrote comedies and stuff. I have the I hope I had them. No. Yes. So the first volume of March the 10th be the early life, and then there will be the few others. We'll see the entire work by thank you, Bill. Yeah, I think Joe thinks I need to apply a master's degree in art as a result in annoying you. Thank you very much. Thank you. So the last video I'm gonna show you now, it's an animation of the School of Athens with music. It's a beautiful Renaissance piece of music. And so with this, I say goodbye. Thank you very much again for following me for this adventure. And I'll take a little break now for a couple of weeks, but I will be back on March the 10th, do March the 10th, the 17th. I'll do a little break for Easter, and then I'll resume in April 2 more about Tutto Bernini, so another great master who worked mostly in Rome. So in fact, this week I also go around taking pictures. I'm missing some pictures on Bernini, especially the lesson of Bernini made a lot of smaller monuments, a lot of smaller things, busts and stuff, which are randomly in churches around Rome. So you have to go there and find a good light. And I've got my flashlight somewhere, because of course the churches are all yeah, I go when I need a picture, I go there with a flashlight, and I got exactly 20 seconds before somebody shouts, no lights, no flash. And so I have to go in like that. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Buonanotte, and I'm gonna play now.
Thanks a lot.
Buonanotte Mario, grazie, grazie, grazie. Una grande presentazione.
Grazie. Buonanotte.
Buonanotte.
Grazie ancora.